Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you. I have been so excited to host tonight's guest, but that excitement comes with glaring irony. It makes no sense to need to. Imagine owning a company, a large one even, where you pay all the bills, the salaries, the cost of production, etc., yet the employees keep the books hidden from you. Completely absurd, you would say. It's a silly notion. Could not exist. Yet that is exactly what happened in our ownership of our by the people, for the people government. Having to sue for the specifics of how your hard-earned tax dollars are being spent seems ludicrous, but that is just what Adam Andrzejewski is doing. I want to introduce you to a husband, father of 3, and marathon runner who could be relaxing on an island somewhere, but instead is spending his days and evidently his evenings fighting tirelessly for accountability from government. Adam was raised in a small town in rural Illinois, worked his way through college, and built a $20 million company with his brother, to whom he eventually sold his shares. Truly the American dream. Out of a campaign promise made when running in the primary for governor of Illinois, he has dedicated himself to true public service with the founding of Openthebooks. The volume of work that Openthebooks is doing is tremendous, filing 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests and holding 161, I believe, investigations capturing $6 trillion in spending. Plainly, Adam is putting obfuscation on the run. A widely read senior contributor at Forbes, his work on big data and forensic auditing have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Fox News, ABC World News Tonight, and Good Morning America, amongst others. His lecture at Hillsdale has been viewed 2.3 million times, demonstrating the great interest in transparency in government spending. In our Zoom introduction meeting, I asked Adam about something he had featured on the desk behind him. He said, "Oh, that's our annual report. I'll send it to you." And within minutes, the financials of Adam's organization arrived in my inbox. Adam is perfectly suited to insist on transparency from the government as he provides it for others without hesitation. There's an immediacy and availability to Adam, just like his work. He answers his phone, he's relatable, present and unpretentious in spite of his significant success. His instincts and habits are precisely what he is calling for from our government, to be forthcoming and swift with data, which in this case belongs to us. To describe Adam, I'm reminded of an old-fashioned compliment. He is a shiny penny, appropriate for a guy demanding the government reveal every dime. Adam, welcome to the forum.
Jane, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm reminded of the words of Dale Carnegie that you give a man a fine reputation to live up to, and I'll try to do the same. As I thought about tonight's presentation, I thought that I don't have a better example of the depth of the swamp than the Brookings Institution. Who is the Brookings Institution? Well, their counterpart on the right is the Heritage Foundation. Brookings in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, is the premier progressive center-left think tank in Washington, D.C. The Brookings Institution and the Trump administration make for very strange bedfellows. But at Openthebooks.com, all the way back to 2008, when looking at the federal checkbook records that we captured, we noticed that through the Obama administration, through the Trump administration, over that 13-year period, Brookings Institution reaped $20 million on federal contracts and grants from 50 federal agencies. During the Trump years, over $3 million continued to flow on contracts and grants. This was very interesting because in 2016, when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton for president, within 30 days, Brookings Institution had a white paper on a roadmap of how to impeach Donald Trump, and he hadn't even been sworn in yet. We know from the House Oversight Committee, when they disclosed FBI records, that a Brookings Institute fellow helped write the Steele dossier, and the Brookings CEO helped distribute the Steele dossier once it was completed. The Steele dossier, according to those records, was instrumental in getting a FISA court judge to comply with FBI wiretaps on the summer of 2016, Donald Trump campaigned for president. So it was very inexplicable to us at openthebooks.com when we looked at our data in 2018 and we found that the Trump White House paid the Brookings Institution $24,000 to train White House employees. Tonight, I have one goal, and it's to shine a white-hot spotlight on the depth of the swamp, the size, scope, and power of federal, state, and local governments across the entire country. But first, I want to give you a little perspective of who we are at openthebooks.com. At openthebooks.com, we are headquartered in Illinois, and it is the Super Bowl of corruption. In Illinois, our number one manufactured product is corruption. And you know our historic reputation of our governors. At one recent point in history, we had 4 out of the last 9 governors serving time in the federal penitentiary. Actually, in 2013, we had 2 governors, one from each party, Republican George Ryan and Democrat Rod Blagojevich. He was the governor that tried to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat. They were in the federal pen at the same time. So at openthebooks.com, coming out of Illinois, you know, we're deeply steeped in the problems of corruption. And I remember when Rahm Emanuel in 2011 was running for mayor of Chicago on a promise to stop corruption in City Hall. Rahm Emanuel actually promised to end pay-to-play in the city of Chicago. And you know pay-to-play. Pay-to-play is when a city contractor gives campaign cash and then gets city contracts. And once Rahm was elected in 2011, he actually issued an executive order to stop the practice. The executive order said, if you're a contractor with the city, you can't give campaign cash to his fund. So in 2015, when Rahm was running for re-election, I received a call from Emmy Award-winning journalist John Stossel, who then was at Fox News headquarters in New York City. And Stossel asked me, Adam, can you fact check Rahm Emanuel's promise? And I said, yes, we can. And we took the city of Chicago checkbook, we matched it up with Rahm Emanuel's campaign donor disclosures, and here's what we found. We found 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million in campaign donations, and those vendors reaped $2 billion in city payments. And that's when we knew, in God we trust, but Illinois politicians we must audit. And look, I don't know if Illinois is the #1 most corrupt state. My vote's with Illinois. But you live in California. And so tonight, I'm sure there will be a debate. And look, 2 weeks ago, we found a story that gave the nation pause. It was international news. You remember when lifeguarding was a part-time summer job. You remember when lifeguarding wasn't a career opportunity to make a lucrative salary and lifetime pension. We did an investigation of the top paid LA County lifeguards. In other words, we put Baywatch on Paywatch. We found that the top paid LA County lifeguards made up to $392,000 in 2019. That was the latest year available. We found 81 LA lifeguards made over $200,000, and 7 of them made over $300,000. We took a look at the LA County, what was driving the largesse of pay, and it was overtime. We found 31 lifeguards made between $50,000 and $134,000 worth of overtime in 2019. We looked out across the country to see if the LA County lifeguards were the top paid in the country, and they were. But we did find the top paid lifeguard in New York City made $168,000. And then in all of Florida, we found that the top paid lifeguard made $118,000. Still too much money. But it does show you how fiscally well-managed states like Florida versus places like New York and California, how much lighter the burden of government is on their taxpayers. Now in California, that wasn't the end of the story because of course the lifeguards are first responders. They're a part of the LA County Fire Department. And so they get a great lifetime benefit of a pension at the end of the day. It's 20 years and out as early as age 50. So think about this. If you're age 20 and you start as an LA County lifeguard in the sun, the fun, the sand, the surf, you put 30 years in, you're out the door, retired at age 50, and you can get 80% of your cash compensation for the rest of your life with cost of living adjustments. And of course, for the 30 years that you were a lifeguard, it came with free sunscreen allowance as well. We have a lot of work to do at all levels of government across this entire country, but I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. Because in the last 5,000 years of human history, we, you and I, have been given the greatest gift. And it's a recognition in our Constitution that our rights are inalienable. Our rights come from God and not government. And our founders enshrined these rights and created a government to secure our rights. But our founders also knew that we needed, as citizens, the tools to hold that government accountable. And our founders recognized that knowledge is power, and they recognized the power of transparency, and they wrote it into the United States Constitution. In its Article 1, Section 9 of the US Constitution, and it states that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And today it's the internet age, the age of big data. There's a clear interpretation. Post every dime online in real time, open the books. And that's our mission at openthebooks.com. We have built the world's largest database of public sector expenditures. And our goal is to provide all of this data free of charge so regular people can come to our website, and at every level of government, federal, state, and local, they can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. And we've had a lot of success capturing data. We filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests last year. That had never been done in the history of the country. We filed those requests on the top 50,000 most substantial public bodies in this country. And here's the data that we compiled. Now, going all the way back to 2001 at the federal level, we have nearly all disclosed federal spending. At the state level, in 49 out of 50 states, we have their checkbook spending. Most of those states go back at least a decade, 10 years. And then for the first time in the history of the country, we've captured virtually every single public employee's salary and retirement annuity record at every level of government across the entire country. Last year, we captured the records of 23 million public employees. And not only do we open the books, we audit those books, and our audits make national news. Now, you probably saw in January, our story at the federal level. We found the #1 most highly compensated federal employee. Now, to put it in perspective, there's 4.3 million federal employees in the executive agencies, the military, the post office. So who's #1? Could have been Nancy Pelosi. She comes from your area of the world. She made, as Speaker of the House, $223,500 last year. Could it have been Vice President Mike Pence? Well, he only made $235,000. Could it be the rare 4-star general in the United States military? They only make $268,000 with millions of men and women in their command. Could it have been the President of the United States at $400,000? And the answer to all those questions is no. Of course, it was Dr. Anthony Fauci. He made $434,000 last year. Now, he's been at Health and Human Services for the last 53 years. He got there in 1968. Now, we're holding the federal payroll back, to the year 2007. So we know that Dr. Anthony Fauci, as late as 2015, was only making $335,000 after his 48 years on the job. So just in the last 6 years, Fauci's had a pay hike of $100,000. At openthebooks.com, we have done reports on the federal bureaucracy. One of our reports is called Mapping the Swamp. a study of the administrative state, and federal employees make a lot of money. According to our data, in 78 of the largest federal agencies, the average salary now exceeds six figures, $100,000 a year. But of course, it's not only about salaries, it's about perks, like paid time off. Incredibly, if you're on the job for just 3 years as a federal bureaucrat, you get 43 days of paid time off. That's 10 holidays, 13 sick days, and 20 vacation days. So let's put that in perspective, because this isn't France. As a federal bureaucrat in your third year, not every week, but nearly every week of the year is a 4-day work week for you, which is pretty incredible. That small perk of the paid time off, we estimate costs the American taxpayer every single year roughly $20 billion. Because if you're giving employees that much time off, your head counts. You have to hire more people, and that's where you get to the $20 billion. It's not only about salaries and perks, but it's also about performance bonuses. And last year, we know that there was 1 million bureaucrats that got a performance bonus, and they reaped $1.1 billion from those bonuses. Now, that mystifies a lot of people. They ask, how can 1 million federal employees get a performance bonus? They don't actually think government's running that well. Well, we dug a little deeper into this. And here's what we found. We found that 99.6% of the federal bureaucracy is rated highly successful. And that's impossible. The advertised purity of Ivory soap is only 99.4%. It's not only about bonuses and perquisites and salary, but it's also about pensions. Now, in the state of California and Illinois, in the union stronghold states like Oregon and New York, when a state and local employee goes retired, we get to see their retirement annuity every single year for as long as they receive that, but not at the federal level. Even though we fund it, we guarantee those federal pensions, we don't get to see it. And join me, we need to reform federal law. There needs to be a change in the law. We deserve to see those retirement annuities. And the same thing exists on the performance bonuses. I know there's 1 million of those bonuses, and I know it cost all of us $1.1 billion, but the federal agencies negotiated away our right to know in the union contracts. So we need federal legislation to not only open the federal pensions so we can see what our retired member of Congress or other federal bureaucrat gets for the rest of their life in retirement, but also we need to open the performance bonuses to see who receives how much in those agencies. Okay, so we've got 500,000 federal employees that make six figures. We call that the threshold salary of highly compensated. As we look across the entire country, we realized that the federal swamp is being dwarfed by the state and local swamp. There's 2.1 million people that make 100,000 or more that work for government. So 500,000 of those are at the federal level, and 1.6 million of those are at the state and local level. So let's start with the state of New York. The highest paid governor of the 50 states is actually Andrew Cuomo. He made $250,000. He's in line to make $250,000 this year, and that dwarfs Gavin Newsom in California, who only made, as the second highest paid, $202,000 last year. In the state of New York, the legislature is the #1 most highly compensated state legislature among the 50 states. They have a salary of $130,000. And of course, in the New York City public schools, because of the strength of the union contracts, the school janitors can make up to $210,000, and they actually out-earn the school principals many times. And it's not only about swamps in blue states. In Texas, in the border community that's very poor of Laredo, Texas, the average household income is only $15,000. But Laredo, Texas in 2019 paid their city manager $880,000. In the trailing 3-year period, they paid the city manager $1.9 million in Laredo, Texas, and that is legalized corruption. But let's talk about the state of California, because California leads on the number of six-figure state and local $100,000 plus public employee salaries at 340,000 of them. New York has 290,000. Texas only has 80,000. The size, scope, and power of state and local government in California dwarfs that of places like Texas and Florida. So let's just take a look at the large city of Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, according to our data at Openthebooks.com, and this is important because taxpayers from around the country just bailed out Los Angeles on the American Rescue Act to the tune of $2 billion. So here's some of what we're bailing out. We're bailing out city-employed painters who on salary and bonus alone could make up to $113,000. We're bailing out tree trimmers in LA that can make up to $207,000. Police officers in LA that can make up to $325,000. We're bailing out aides to the city council, who the top aide last year made $399,000 on salary and bonus. We're bailing out firefighters in LA that made up to $474,000. And we're bailing out the boat harbor pilots that last year made up to $515,000 in the city of LA. And we're also bailing out their police chief, who operates with the blessing, under the blessing of their mayor, Garcetti, who obviously wants to be president of the United States someday. So here's the pay package that Garcetti blessed for the police chief in LA. A couple of years ago, the police chief was actually the operations chief in LA. Garcetti wanted him as the police chief and he gave him a gift. He allowed him to retire for 30 days. So today, as the police chief, that guy can collect a salary and a pension. His salary is $350,000. His pension is $240,000 a year. He got the mayor's blessing so he can double dip. But it's even a little bit worse than that. Underneath the local law, the police chief was able to cash out when he retired $1.3 million in a lump sum and $170,000 worth of unused sick and vacation days as a lump sum as well. Again, this is institutionalized corruption. All right, let's move it into a little bit closer to home into the city of San Francisco. So in the city of San Francisco, you can be a city painter at taxpayer cost. So this includes your benefits, and make up to $268,000 a year. As a truck driver, you can make up to $270,000 a year. You can be a plumber in the city of San Francisco and clean off up to $348,000 a year. The firefighters make a little less on the top end of the scale than $500,000 a year. And of course, in San Francisco, you have the most highly compensated mayor of any mayor in our database across the United States. Last year, she made north of $452,000 at taxpayer cost. And at Openthebooks.com, we've used our data to fact check the political promises of the San Francisco mayor, London Breed. So she became the acting mayor in 2017, and she was promising to the citizens and residents of San Francisco that she would clean up the streets of San Francisco. You see, San Francisco has about 8,000 homeless people, and they have a problem with the homeless people defecating on city streets. And so she promised to clean up the streets. So in 2019, our auditors fact-checked the promise. And here's what we found. We found that in 2011, there was about 5,000 cases reported to the city's 311 center of human waste in the public way. And by 2015, that had risen to about 13,000 cases. In 2017, when Breed became mayor, it was around 20,000 cases. Then in 2018, it went to 28,000. In 2019, it spiked off to 31,000 cases of human waste in the public way. And our auditors were able to download the 311 calls which actually included latitude and longitude of each case that was called in to the city's non-emergency line. And we created a map of those calls. And yes, we did use brown pins. And let me tell you, there is a brownout in the Bay Area. The entire city was brown. And that map trended on national Twitter, and it was international news. At openthebooks.com, these are just some of the ways our data can be used to hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. So we ask one question, and we've asked this since inception. What government program is running well? So could it be the federal government's response to COVID? Let's explore some of the coronavirus relief and aid packages, these omnibus, minibus, relief and aid, these massive spending bills that have come down the pike over the course of the last 12 months. So if you remember back to the CARES Act, this was in March of 2020. This was the $2.2 trillion bill that passed unanimously in Congress, and it included a provision of Paycheck Protection Program funding for small businesses. And it was done in a number of rounds, and the first round closed out rather quickly, and a lot of small businesses on Main Street were closed out of that funding. So at openthebooks.com, we took a look at who actually received some of that funding, and we found some of the, of the Hollywood entertainers received it. Like Kanye West, he claims to be a billionaire, and he's got the shoe company, and the shoe company took in the first round PPP funds of $2.4 million. And he's a billionaire, and the shoes are expensive. And then we took a look at the Robert Redford's foundation. They've got $50 million listed on their IRS 990 in their bank account. And Robert Redford's foundation out in Colorado, in Denver, they took $3.4 million in PPP funds. Then you've got the Hollywood producer of probably the greatest movie ever made, The Godfather, Francis Ford Coppola. He's got two companies there in California, and the two companies combined for $8.5 million worth of PPP funding. All of this pales in comparison to what the New York Times found. And I wish our auditors had found this. The New York Times tied out PPP funding for the CCP, the Communist Chinese defense contractors. 125 defense contractors reaped between $200 million and $400 million of paycheck protection funding. The CARES Act, we know, was being debated with multiple versions in the Senate. Nobody even knew what they were voting on. At openthebooks.com, we have seen these massive bills where we've questioned whether or not we have a representative republic. Because do we have a representative republic when our representatives don't even know what they're voting on? So at openthebooks.com, you can sign our petition to simply read the bill. Here's what it would require. 72-hour timeout after the final version of the bill. It gets posted online so people, pundits, press, so our auditors can go through it and figure out what's in the bill. And I'm proud to say that this has already been turned into Senate legislation with Florida U.S. Senator Rick Scott writing the bill, 72-hour timeout to read it, and it's even a little tougher. It would require an affidavit from every member of Congress to state that they had actually read the bill and its good policy. Join me on the effort to get this simple reform. It's probably a 99% issue with the American people through the United States Congress. So COVID relief. Let's go right to the American Rescue Act with Joe Biden. And let's put this in perspective, because there was a lot of waste in that $1.9 trillion American Rescue Act. It passed on party lines. Democrats voted for it. Not one single Republican voted for that bill, and Joe Biden signed it. And there's a lot of waste, but here's what we know. It was all borrowed, $1.9 trillion. And our auditors have done a study of the national debt. when Barack Obama came into office in 2009, our national debt was around $10 trillion. When Donald Trump came into office 8 years later, our national debt was around $20 trillion. After 4 years in a pandemic, when Trump left office, the national debt was about $28 trillion. And once all the spending is done in the American Rescue Act, our national debt is north of $30 trillion. So about 800 billion, if you're generous, of the American Rescue Act was actually targeted toward COVID relief, and that leaves $1.1 trillion in non-targeted spending. So let's walk through some of the provisions of this. First off, what was called the blue state bailout, the $350 billion bailout of the 50 states and 30,000 localities across the country. Our auditors tried for a week to find out the 30,000 localities who, what unit, what cities, towns, villages, counties, townships were getting money out of that bill. And finally, after a week, we got the database. Then it was ripped down at the House Oversight Committee back end once we published the piece at Forbes, but we had made an interactive map around it so everybody could look up their hometown. And you can see it all at openthebooks.com on our interactive mapping platform. You can see how much your hometown is getting on a COVID bailout from Congress. So for instance, in the state of California, Beverly Hills, zip code 90210, is getting $6.2 million of congressional bailout. The richest community in America, Atherton, California, where the average household income is north of $525,000, they're getting a congressional COVID bailout of $1.3 million. Hillsborough, where the average home is nearly $6 million, is getting a $2.3 million congressional bailout. And this is happening everywhere across the country. The richest community on the East Coast is Scarsdale, and Jay-Z and Beyonce own a home there, and they're getting $2.3 million. And the Hamptons are getting $8 million. And Key West, the vacation destination in Florida, they're getting $10.1 million of COVID bailout. And all the elites in New York City, they fled to Greenwich, Connecticut, and Greenwich, Connecticut's getting a $20 million bailout. Right there in Santa Clara, California, your county, for crying out loud, is getting $400 million of bailout from Congress. Santa Monica is getting $29 million. San Jose is getting $22 million. You don't need the money unless you've mismanaged your state. But here's what House Democrats did. They changed the formula allocation. Traditionally, this type of bailout would have gone by population to the states. But Nancy Pelosi's House changed the allocation formula to go on the fourth quarter unemployment rate. So it had the effect of shifting bailout dollars from fiscally well-run states like Florida to fiscally mismanaged states and COVID lockdown states like New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and California. California on the allocation change will reap an extra $6.6 billion. New York gets an extra $6 billion. Florida loses over $2 billion. Illinois gains over $2 billion, and so did New Jersey. The allocation change in total shifted $31 billion. Here's what's not talked about. California got $42 billion. Texas got $27 billion. New York got $23 billion. Florida, who has more people than the state of New York, got $17.5 billion. But Indian tribes, there's about 600 tribes, Native American tribes in the country, they got $20 billion. And there's only 3 million members of those tribes. Their allocation was greater than every state except 3. To put it in perspective, Puerto Rico, a US territory, got $4 billion. They also have a state population of 3 million residents. And so this hasn't been talked about. But if you come to openthebooks.com, we have all the data. No matter where you're at in the 13 states on this call, you can look up your hometown relatively rapidly. We mapped it all under 50 states, 50 pins, click a pin, scroll down, and you can see the allocation that renders in the map beneath the chart, in the chart beneath the map. Let's talk about American Rescue Act, K through 12 education. So in K through 12 education, in in the pandemic year of 2020, there was $80 billion allocated to the schools. And it was so much money that they couldn't even spend $10 billion of it. In the American Rescue Act, in one fell swoop, $128 billion was allocated to K through 12 schools. Our auditors found, backed up by the Congressional Budget Office, that $1 out of every $3 won't even be spent till after the next election. In the infrastructure bill that's coming down the pike that the White House proposed, there's another $100 billion for K through 12 schools. Come on. No one's got a funding source on this. It's all borrowed. Higher education. In the pandemic year of 2020, passing on roughly a bipartisan basis, $13 billion was allocated toward higher education. In the American Rescue Act, in one fell swoop, nearly $40 billion was allocated toward higher education. So who are some of the winners? Well, it's the 8 schools of the Ivy League. They've got an endowment north of $140 billion collectively. And collectively, they'll reap from Congress $168 million of coronavirus bailout funds. One of the biggest public frauds in the history of the country is unfolding in real time. Look, because of the federal lockdowns, state and local lockdowns, at the height of the pandemic, 44 million people lost their jobs. There's real pain out there. And America is rich enough to afford a soft social safety net. So the unemployment benefits of $860 billion allocated by Congress since the pandemic hit, these are dollars that are supposed to be serving people who have real needs and trying to alleviate real pain. Except there's just rampant fraud from criminals and con artists and crime syndicates. Now the estimates range from $80 billion of fraud up to $200 billion worth of fraud. Government was in no position to have basic, simple accounting controls as they pushed these dollars out, and criminals took full advantage of the situation. And it's a crime spree on steroids. Okay, so we also read the bill at Openthebooks.com. Our auditors read the American Rescue Act, and on page 305, we found a new perk for federal workers. And here's what it is. While the American people were getting $1,400 in one-time stimulus payments, the new perk for federal workers provides $1,400 a week for 15 weeks, $21,000 total for federal bureaucrats if their child's school is not open full time. So even if your school's hybrid, virtual a little bit, in the classroom for a little bit, federal workers can be paid to stay home to the tune of $21,000. And it's not an inexpensive perk. There's a new fund set up at the Treasury Department, and they put $570 million in that fund to fund this new benefit. So we have a lot of work to do at all levels of government in this country. Right now, we stand at an inflection point moment where the left is making the argument to the American people that government can do more than what individuals and capitalists can do for themselves. I think it's a high bar. We don't see that in the data at Openthebooks.com. And very quickly, I want to walk you through one of the most compelling reports we did that shows that government is just inept. It has institutionalized incompetence. Now, if we say something, you can doubt it. But when the federal government, the 20 largest federal agencies, issue a report where they admit to their improper and mistaken payments, it has to be the truth. They've been doing this report, we found, since 2004. And over that period, the 20 largest federal agencies admit to $2.5 trillion worth of improper and mistaken payments. So I want to walk you through what they admitted last year. In 1 year, $180 billion of mistakes. That's $15 billion a month, $500 million a day. And for every single minute a bureaucrat's on the job, it's $1 million a minute. And these are payments made to the wrong person or in the wrong amount or under the wrong set of rules. These are mistakes, and there's a lot of fraud in it. Now, the left wants Medicare for all. But between Medicaid and Medicare last year, there was $103 billion that they admit to of improper payments. And they want to put that program on steroids? Are you kidding me? Let's take a look at some of the other big offenders, like the Internal Revenue Service. Don't try this at home. The Internal Revenue Service administers the Earned Income Tax Credit Program, where they admit to $18 billion worth of improper payments, people that got the money that didn't deserve the money. It was 1 out of every $4 in the entire program. We reached out to comment to the IRS, and what they said was very interesting. They said, we know they're improperly paid, and we don't have the resources to stop it. And so this is going to continue into the foreseeable future. On $180 billion of improper payments that they admit to, how much was clawed back? And it was 14 cents on every dollar. Much of the money, the agencies, they're not even pursuing, they're not even trying to claw it back. So relative pittance is ever clawed back on behalf of taxpayers. Let's take a look at another federal agency that's a big offender, the Social Security Administration. $8 billion worth of improper and mistaken payments. We dug a little deeper on that number. Their books are a mess. Incredibly, at Social Security, they have 6 million active Social Security numbers of people aged 112 and older. Here's the problem. There's only less than 40 of those people alive in the entire world. So government institutionalized incompetence on improper and mistaken payments. Okay, so I want to wrap up with the following story. You and I believe that there's a politician out there that's going to save us, and I'm here to say that there isn't. You know, you'd think that maybe Republicans who ran on fiscal conservatism would have our backs, but about a month ago, let's just talk about what the Republicans in the House did on a secret vote. And right there in California, you've got the leader of the House Republicans, Kevin McCarthy. So it's about time we bring the heat so these guys start to see the light. Here's what they did on a secret vote. You know, the Democrats, after a 10-year hiatus, the Democrats wanted to bring back earmarks. Earmarks is the old-fashioned log-rolling, smoke-filled back room. It's how you bribe a member of Congress to get their vote on a big spending bill. And you can actually spend more money when you start bribing people to vote for your bills, because you're putting pork back on the table. They can, quote, bring home the bacon. So Democrats proposed 10 earmarks per member. That's 4,350 earmarks on the year, 1% of discretionary spending. It's a big number, $13 billion. And make no mistake, bringing back earmarks is akin to bringing back the swine flu. So the Republicans forgot their principles. In a secret vote, 102 to 84, they voted to join the Democrats to help drain the U.S. Treasury from the left. They decided not to create a clear line on spending and ethics versus Democrats. And they were greedy and decided to get in on the game. And you know how this turns out, like you had in 2006, California Congressman Duncan Hunter. So he admitted to accepting $2.4 million worth of bribes from a lobbyist, including a Rolls Royce, a yacht, and a 19th century Louis Philippe commode, a toilet. And then he was in jail for a number of years, and then he got out on a Trump pardon. In Illinois, we know how earmarks work. You know, we had in 2005 House Speaker from Illinois, Danny Hastert. A couple of years earlier, he bought a piece of farm ground. 2005, he earmarked a road through his farm ground. The earmark was $207 million. A couple of months after that, he sold his farm ground and reaped millions. These are winkers. And the Republican Party has no business joining Democrats to bring them back. This is a key issue with Openthebooks.com. As we rolled out on a national basis, we rolled out arm in arm with the former legendary U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, Dr. Tom Coburn. Coburn in 2013 made the Time 100 most influential persons in the world list. Banning earmarks was one of Coburn's signature policies when he was in the U.S. Senate. And so we at Openthebooks.com, we will not rest until earmarks are banned again. I just want to close here this evening with the following story from our honorary chairman, the late, he passed away about a year ago, Dr. Tom Coburn. When Coburn was leaving the Senate, he told the following story. You know, he was a physician with his primary role. He had delivered over 4,000 babies back in his small town in Oklahoma. He loved being a physician. And he issued the 3-minute warning to America. He said, when you're a physician and the law of large numbers, sometimes when you're delivering a baby, something will go wrong. And you'll know there's a problem when the baby's heartbeat, which is normally 130 to 140 beats a minute, falls to 50 or 60 beats per minute. Coburn said, at that moment, as her physician, you've got 3 minutes to make a decision. You can go for the forceps and pull the baby out. You can go for the vacuum extractor. You can make the decision to wheel the mother out to surgery, cut a hole in her belly, and take the baby via C-section. But Coburn said, the point is you had to make a decision. You had 3 minutes to save the life of the mother, to save the life of the baby. And Coburn said, this moment now is America's 3-minute moment. If we don't act on spending, corruption, national debt, and taxes, we're going to lose the baby. Join us at Openthebooks.com. Join the transparency revolution. We believe that it is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics.
Adam, I believe in 45 minutes, you just delivered the most potent message that the Liberty Forum has ever heard. And what I feel badly about is perhaps we should have given some kind of a medical warning at the beginning of this, because if you have a heart condition, I'm pretty sure you're probably no longer in attendance. In my living room, you should have heard the gasps, and I'm sure it was true all over the internet with what you have just shared with us. Transparency is the healthy blood that must run through the body of liberty, and clearly your work is the necessary transfusion.
Well, thank you, Jane. Because, I turned 51 and I'm almost 52, my eyes have started to go. So I actually can't see my notes unless I put my glasses on. So I did miss the section in my talk, and I'd like to discuss it briefly before we go to Q&A.
Sure.
On our lawsuit.
Adam, may I also interrupt you? I think you had some questions for the audience too, and if you want to insert those with Keone, now would be a good time.
Okay, so Keone, if you want to put the plebiscites up to poll the audience, that's great. I'll give a brief summary of our lawsuit versus California Comptroller Betty Yee. As I mentioned in my talk, we collect the line-by-line state checkbook spending, the vendor spending in 49 out of 50 states. The lone holdout for the last number of years has been California. And so we finally got serious about enforcing transparency law in the Golden State. We filed our Freedom of Information Act request in 2019, and she rejected the request, oddly saying that out of 49 million transactions, she couldn't find a single one to produce. It was her words, not ours. We know California as a state spends about $320 billion a year. Furthermore, we know that about a third of that budget comes back to the Golden State from Washington, D.C. That's our money in the Golden State, and we deserve to see it. So we sued Betty E to begin the process of forcing open the California state checkbook. And it's not our first rodeo. In 2012, we sued Republican comptroller in Illinois, Judy Bar Topinka. Topinka said that they didn't have a magical checkbook. And we reminded her that the state doesn't have magical taxpayers either. In 2018, we sued Republican state auditor Cynthia Cloud in Wyoming. She said it would take years and years to produce their checkbook. When a new state auditor came in, it made our lawsuit moot. She produced 7 years worth of line-by-line spending within 30 days. We think it's absolutely laughable in the state of California that houses Silicon Valley of all things, that California state government can't produce a checkbook. Of course they can, but they are hiding it. They're hiding it from you and I, and they need to be reminded that they work for us. We expect to win our lawsuit in the state of California.
Terrific.
Adam, how about if I launch that first poll question about California residency?
Sounds great.
5 years from today, will California be your primary state of residence? Yes or no? The A's have it 63%.
Yeah, it's a big percentage that say that they won't. I don't know how many people are from out of state as a percentage of people on the call. But look, I'm from Illinois. I'm not leaving either. I'm not leaving Illinois. My family on my mother's side's been here since the 1820s. We crossed the prairie. We dug up the prairie grass. We planted the first set of crops and built the family farm. And 8 generations, it's still owned by my uncles. Like, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I'm fighting. I encourage you to do the same in California.
We've got the second question about federal employee pay. So I'll launch that now. For today, did you know that Dr. Anthony Fauci was the #1 most highly compensated federal employee, even out earning the president? About 2/3 knew that. 1/3 found out tonight.
The reason I wanted to ask that question is I wanted to see the market penetration of that story. And, you know, sometimes, even though we're not based in the Beltway, sometimes, you know, your thinking gets clouded by Beltway thinking. So I wanted to see how far that story had penetrated out to the rest of the country. So it is good news that it's 2/3, 1/3, and hopefully we brought some needed scrutiny to the good doctor.
And then I've got the public policy question, and I didn't know if you wanted to put that out there now or let that out there for viewers to read it, think about it, respond, and maybe submit some other questions related to that.
That sounds good. You could put it up, and then if people could think about it and then maybe vote later.
Okay. I'll go ahead and launch that. We can kind of leave that in the background. Then Jane, I think I'll turn over to you for the Q&A.
Okay, that's great. So I'll just move the poll question, and I have to clarify something before we go to the audience questions. I just want to make sure I heard this because I think I started hallucinating about being a lifeguard early on in the program. I'm clearly career choice was really foolish for me, but did you say that there's $1 million of identified fraud being spent every minute? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. So we used the 40-hour work week. We were very generous with the federal bureaucracy. They probably don't work 40 hours a week. They probably work like 37.5 hours a week or something like that. But on a 40-hour work week for the federal executive agencies, they actually waste every single minute $1 million. They waste their entire paycheck. Think about this. If you were running a private sector company, and for your entire payroll of that company, they also mistakenly and improperly paid out the same amount of money as what your payroll cost. That's what's going on at the federal level. It is simply institutionalized incompetence.
That's really just staggering. I was excited to have Adam come this month because it's April 13th and we all know what's coming up. And so as we write those checks and think about spending our own hard-earned money to pay for taxes, which we hope go to good things and needed things, we're listening to this with it's just staggering, Adam. It's simply staggering. So let me jump into the questions. One of our members says, can you explain how the process works when you get involved in a local audit?
Yes. Okay, so basically it's a 5-step process. Okay, and we've used this model. I think it's foremost in the country in terms of a watchdog model. There's a pair of watchdogs here in Illinois that have successfully pioneered and implemented this model. And in Illinois, over the course of 6 years, they've actually forced out 400 local and elected officials who have fled in the face of this 5-step model. So step number 1, open data. When you look at that, you'll have questions. And step 2, you need to take your questions to the public official and ask them. Now, what you'll find is they're not real responsive to your questions. So oftentimes you'll have to take your question into public comment at their public meeting. You tip the media in advance as to what you're going to ask. It becomes a media event. To get the answer to your question, you may have to network up to 50 to 500 of your friends and family into those public meetings. And the media scrutiny, the scrutiny from citizens, that model has forced out 400 elected officials or public officials in the state of Illinois that rather than answer the question, they fled in the face of it. So that's the model. Here's how it happened at my own junior college. At my own junior college, they had agreed back in 2008 to post their checkbook on their own website. And then in 2014, I realized that it had disappeared from their website. And it had disappeared when we filed the request for the checkbook. We got it. We realized that they were hiding $100 million over a 5-year period with a special type of accounting called impressed accounting, which is petty cash accounting, where they hid the line-by-line expenses of that from their own board, from the people, from the press. Only the chairman and the accounting staff and the president of the school knew the details. And so when we went into that, we found a radio station engineer of the school had been trading with his own company to the tune of $400,000. Now, the school claimed ignorance on this, but when he was eventually prosecuted for that, he pled. He was forced to pay restitution of $400,000. He has served time in the penitentiary, and he lost his retirement pension.
I'm picturing rats fleeing out, and that's 400, and that's just Illinois, right?
Right.
Incredible. One of our audience members says, has the Defense Department ever had a successful audit?
No, they keep flunking. Kudos to President Trump for actually forcing the Pentagon to complete an audit. So it was 1,200 auditors. I think they spent $500 million in the last 2 years, each year, on their audit, and they continue to flunk the audit.
Have any of the fiscal mismanagement exposures, asks one of our audience members, resulted in refunded funds? And if so, will any of these funds result in actual tax refunds to the taxpayers? In other words, did we get any money back ever?
So on improper payments, here's a good story that I missed relating on my core presentation. So we did an oversight report of the Department of Education back in 2017. And we were pretty hard on Betsy DeVos, the good education secretary, because there was $6 billion that education admitted to of improper and mistaken payments on Pell Grants and student loans. Well, she really took that to heart. They went to work on that. And I am proud to say that last year they cut that, and she'll probably say it's still too much. They cut the improper payments to $1 billion. They eliminated, by focusing on it, 85% of their improper payments. They were the best turnaround story of any federal agency. Kudos to Secretary Betsy DeVos for focusing on it and having real impact on that number.
That's really tremendous. Is there a good resource for following the money with political campaigns?
Yes, at the federal level, opensecrets.gov. So we use that. We use that information. We also download directly from the Federal Election Commission the raw data. So soon we're going to come out with a pay-to-play report at the federal level. You know, who gave campaign cash to folks running for Congress and then reaped federal grants from Congress. This could be a very interesting report. You see, if you're a contractor, you can't give money in the federal races. But if you're a grant recipient, those rules don't exist. So this will be a very, and look, the elites in this country have gamed the system for personal gain, whether it's the Ivy League. We did an oversight report a couple of years ago, 6 years, 8 schools, and they reaped $25 billion on federal contracts and grants. They'd only collected $22 billion of student tuition. They were more federal contractor than they were educator. This is the type of thing that we're finding across the entire continuum. We're all working hard. They don't need the money, but they want the money.
Yeah. Next question is, are you getting any support from corporate America, or do most of them benefit from this spending?
So our donations at Openthebooks.com, we're organized as a public charity, IRS 501c3, qualified organization. We don't receive corporate money. I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that twice over the course of the last 6 years, we've done an oversight report on the Fortune 100 companies dialed into the federal checkbook and the largesse that they receive from the federal checkbook, or not. But it used to be when you were a corporation, you'd hire a lobbyist to keep government out of your business. Now they all hire lobbyists to saddle up and become partners with government. So, things are a little out of control.
So the question is, how do we stop all this fraud? We're certainly exposing it. You're exposing it. Do you have hope?
Well, that's exactly why I was so excited when I heard the very articulate first presentation tonight from Paulette, a member of your organization. This is a huge victory all the way to the United States Supreme Court, because Paulette, I'm sure supported by the Silicon Valley Liberty Forum, has carried this case all the way to the Supreme Court and won the injunction. And this is what it's going to take. We are going to either exercise our rights or we're going to lose our rights. The fact that those 2 watchdogs in Illinois can force out 400 local and elected officials from office on a transparency and accountability basis shows us all that the fundamental underlying law in this country is still good. We just don't even know what our rights are. We don't know what the law is. In Illinois, we're a Dillon's Rule state. Most people have never heard of Dillon's Rule. And it is, I think California is a Dillon's Rule state. We'd have to check it.
Dillon's Rule.
But I believe it is. Dillon's Rule simply says that if you're a public body, you do not have the ability to spend unless it's expressly given to you by statute. All other spending is illegal spending. So when you look at the checkbook, and if you see something that looks crazy, like, gift cards for Christmas gifts to public employees in Illinois, that's illegal. You can't do that. That's illegal spending. So, things that you would say, oh, it's something nice to do, this and that. No, you just can't do it. And this is where you could be successful as a citizen. You can exercise. Look, in America, the citizen is sovereign. In Reagan's inaugural address, he said, government's the car, the citizen's the driver. The citizen tells us how fast to go, where to turn, and most importantly, when to stop. Paulette's doing that in Santa Clara County, and it's an inspiring story.
Yeah, it is. Here's another person who wants to do something. One of our guests is saying, can you find out how much federal income tax is collected per town, per zip code, basically? So she said, so I can get it posted on the city signs and the citizens will know what they paid.
That's actually a pretty good idea. I believe the census data exists, very, very detailed information. They even banned the income taxpayers. They don't tell you who paid more than $1 million, but one of the bans is probably $1 million of federal income tax paid and up. I mean, they banned out the amounts that everyone pays and total it up per jurisdiction. I don't know if it's done on a zip code basis. It might be done on a town, village, or city basis, but nevertheless, there's very, very detailed information on federal income taxpayers.
How many employees are at Open the Books? One of our guests would like to know. And are they located in one place, or do you have people across the country? They also wonder if whistleblowers contact you.
All the time. We get some of our best tips from whistleblowers, that's for sure. And oftentimes when we run an investigation on a unit of government, you need somebody on the inside to help you, to tell you where all the bodies are buried. So whistleblowers come in handy and giving us some of our best stories on a local, state, or national basis. And oftentimes they keep you on a good path when you're on an investigation. So the first part of that question was, how many employees do we have at openthebooks.com? Look, we punch above our weight. We compete up against our goal is to become the most impactful public policy organization in the country over the course of the next 24 months. And since we're holding all the data, shame on us if we can't be there with the oversight piece. Last year, we did 43 investigations. This year, we're going to do between 125 and 140 investigations, plus publish 208 daily waste of the day pieces at Real Clear. So we are ramping up our oversight operation. Right now, most of our workforce is dedicated to data capture. 26 full-time equivalents filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. And that's because we've coded a proprietary, what we call a Freedom of Information Act sunshine machine, where 26 people can basically hit buttons, file the requests, follow up on those requests, accept the production, break it open, map it up to our website, our mobile app, and our interactive maps. So most of our budget goes to data capture, and we're building out the oversight wing. I just hired 3 journalists last year. I was the journalist. So now we've basically tripled our capacity to publish pieces.
Adam, how did you go from business owner to investigator?
So that's kind of a longer story. So my father and mother, and he'll say our entire family, back in 1976 and 1978, my dad, as a conservative Democrat, stood up against one of the most powerful and corrupt politicians in Illinois state history. My dad ran for state representative against future governor and federal inmate, George Ryan. And Ryan needed to beat my father in 78 so he could become Speaker of the House in Illinois. And unfortunately, he did. But my father's races, my parents instilled in me the nobility of public service. And so my family, I was the oldest of 7 kids. I was at or near the federal poverty markers for my entire upbringing. And so my passion was always public policy and politics. But I knew I had to do it differently than what my father did to try to make an impact. So I first wanted to establish myself in business. So my brother had gone to Harvard Law School. We partnered in business, and over a 10-year period, we went from our apartments to $20 million of sales. And that's when I sold my shares to my brother and an investor. And then I got to concentrate on public policy and politics, and I settled on this issue of transparency. But I fight so hard because of my entrepreneurial experience. Briefly, at the end of 1 year, my brother and I were upside down. Everything that we had saved to that point. It was all the money in the world to us. It was 100 grand between us. We were upside down, all of it. At the end of year 3, we hit $1 million milestone of sales. We should have been celebrating, but that was the year we nearly lost the business. Because as an entrepreneur, you pay everything in advance, your taxes, everything. And since everyone gets paid, but you on a cash basis, I had to run around and collect revenues so we could make payroll. At the end of 6 years, that was the first year my brother and I finally out-earned our employees. Up through 5 years, we'd make a little bit. It would go back into the business on a capital call and, to help grow the business. So at the end of year 6, we were a $5 million gross sales company. But at the end of year 10, we were a $20 million business and an overnight success. No banker would loan us money. When we sold to an investor, my brother stayed in the business as a minority owner, but I was cashed out. We had a $25,000 line of credit. And it wasn't because they discriminated against guys with Polish 12-letter last names. It was because they thought we had a bad idea. So we had to carry that business. We had to do it on our own dime, and that made our business better. But I can tell you, but for another dime's worth of federal taxes, regulations, and fees in year 3, we would have been gone. We would not have made it past year 3 if any of those things would have been higher. And that's why I fight so hard to make sure that when government taxes us and spends our tax dollar, they spend it honestly, efficiently, and it helps people who have real needs.
Your passion is hard fought and won. You mentioned this idea of having the legislatures sign something that says, I have read this, being obligated to read the bills, which is mind-boggling that they wouldn't anyway. What do you think about having them initial every page saying, I have read the above and considered the consequences?
Hey, look, I love it, and we're supposed to be driving the car, we the people, and we should insist on it. Look, the bill written by Rick Scott right now that sits in the US Senate, I think it only has 3 or 4 sponsors. Like, Republicans aren't even jumping on that bill. No Democrats are on that bill. Like, it's probably a 99% issue with the American people. Think back to December of 2020. In that omnibus bill, it was 5,600 pages, and it was dropped right before Christmas, 2 hours before the vote. Nobody knew what was in it. Even AOC tweeted, this isn't legislating, this is hostage taking. She voted for it anyway, didn't know what was in it, but she was right on the issue. And it's a transparency issue that is probably a 99% issue with the American people. We need to insist on a 72-hour timeout to read it, and our representatives need to sign off on it.
So I'd like to ask you about auditing the Fed, and is there any progress on this idea that Ron Paul had years ago?
I remember when that bill came up for a vote, and all of a sudden we had a flash crash on Wall Street when it looked like it was going to pass. We need to get back to it. So think about this, coronavirus relief, the entire toolbox of coronavirus relief, and most people don't know this. There's been $6 trillion passed from Congress. There's been about $750 billion that the presidents have had in direct control of spending. And there's been another $5 trillion worth of coronavirus toolbox aid come out of the Fed. We have thrown $11 trillion between Congress, the president, and the Fed at this virus. And the Fed has opened up some pretty extraordinary tools most people don't know about. They opened up a municipal debt facility outside of Congress. There wasn't a representative vote on this. And there's been 2 already to the tune of $5 to $6 billion, 2 takers on the municipal debt that have gone through the Fed window to guarantee their debt.
I'm sorry, what is a municipal debt facility? My head is-
So back in March and April of last year, there was a question at one point about the solvency and the liquidity of municipal debt. And so the Fed stepped into that breach with a special first ever window where they said, you can come to the Fed, we'll guarantee, if you're having problems, we'll guarantee your debt. And there was two takers to the tune of billions. I think $3 billion, of course, was Illinois. The Fed guaranteed our debt, right? Fed meaning taxpayers. But there was never a vote on Congress for this. The Fed did it. And the other unit of government, I think it was $2 billion, if memory serves, was the New York MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority. And I don't want to be guaranteeing their debt either. Like Illinois should be making their own decisions. We're a state, and so should the MTA. We shouldn't be going to the Fed doing a runaround around Congress.
Staggering. Any thoughts on the lost California unemployment benefits? They're just missing hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the LA Times piece when the feds busted the strip mall shop with the line around the corner where people were lining up. They were paying people a couple of $100 to participate in fraud. I think they stole $11 million before they shut them down. Just brazen. And these states like California were just overwhelmed. They didn't have the staff. They didn't have the basic accounting financial controls. The computer software programs were old. I mean, right here in the state of Illinois, I received an unemployment notice at openthebooks.com for myself. And before we could respond saying, hey, this is fraud, a credit card showed up in my mailbox with $2,300 loaded on it. And this is what's happening all across the country.
Oh my gosh. So another guest tonight says he's having difficulty seeing how this ends, except for the government defaulting on the bonds and or the Fed exponentially expanding the money supply to buy up government bonds. Is there another probable alternative outcome?
Well, yes. The Democrats will tell you that this is the modern era and we don't need to worry about deficits or debt. It's MMT, modern monetary theory, right? You don't need a funding source. If you print your own currency, debt doesn't matter. We at openthebooks.com fundamentally disagree. We agree with the 2012 comments from President Barack Obama's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Michael Mullins, who said that the national debt is the #1 long-term security threat to America. Our honorary chairman, Dr. Tom Coburn, he wrote the book, The Debt Bomb, and he said it's just like a cliff. It works till it doesn't. We agree. And so here's the question that I want to ask Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Joe Biden, because they look like they're stunning, brazen, $6 trillion worth of proposed spending by the Biden administration in their first 100 days. We've never seen anything like this. You can only do that unless you're subscribing to MMT. So here's the question I want them to answer. If you don't need a funding source, just rescind all taxes in the country. Put the income tax to 0. Put the sales tax to 0. But of course, that's absurd. Their entire MMT monetary theory is absurd. It's like a murder mystery movie. It never ends well.
I'm always struck by people who say, oh, I don't mind paying more taxes. I make a lot of money and it's just fine. And I always think, well, okay, then why aren't you sending an extra $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 on April 15th to the government?
Exactly.
Yeah. Another question about your organization. Are you being at all subject to cancel culture or pressures from unions?
We're not. I'm going to answer the question just directly. We're not. And we've been covered very well by mainstream media pretty much across the continuum. We try to scope our stories and we pay a lot of attention to this. So they're at least 65% stories with the American people. That if we ran out the story, at least 2 out of 3 people would say, yeah, I agree with that. And most of our stories are even more than that. They're 80-90% stories, kind of like read the bill. Like, who would be against that, right? We try to use, so our former honorary chair, Dr. Tom Coburn, he used halo examples to try to generate big reform ideas. So when he was able to ban earmarks, they hit that so hard, even Barack Obama in 2011 in his State of the Union speech twice said that if a bill containing earmarks would come to his desk, he would veto it. And he said it twice in that State of the Union speech. Coburn kicked off that earmark campaign a lot earlier. I think it was 2004, when he identified late at night in the well of the US Senate, the bridge to nowhere, a $200 million earmark in Alaska from the mainland to an island that housed less than 80 people. And he lost the vote that night, and he wasn't close, and only 14 Republicans stood with him. And he knew he would be retaliated against, and he was. The Senate stripped him of his ability to practice medicine. That night, Ted Stevens, the Republican Alaskan senator, red-faced, fist-clenched, barreled down the aisle. Coburn was a freshman senator, and he screamed at him, told him to get his amendment off the floor, and Coburn would not. But he created that tension, and eventually they used that bridge to nowhere to get rid of earmarks as we know it. And that's the type of political courage and leadership that's lacking in the United States Congress.
Next question is, how does China fit in this, and how can America compete with all this debt and federal and state corruption? I think we're keep competing really well with China in terms of corruption, but
so look, I think, I used to say long term, I think that China is our most compelling adversary in real time, and they feel emboldened in real time. I mean, they are using strong arm diplomatic techniques with the Biden administration. And so, look, at openthebooks.com, foreign policy is not our strong suit in bailiwick. We concentrate on the flow of funds. But China has to be giddy with how America has reacted to the coronavirus, running up our national debt, the tension in our streets, and even, taking these rushed pieces of legislation and profiting from it. I mean, $200 million to $400 million, the New York Times, in paycheck protection funds that was supposed to go to entrepreneurs on Main Street was scooped up by the Chinese Communist Party on their defense contractors. Stunning.
it really is stunning. While you were speaking, I was jotting down some of the numbers that you were writing, and I honestly couldn't keep up with you. I just couldn't keep up with you. I mean, of course, you had me at 4 out of 9 of your governors from Illinois and being in jail, but then we went off with the billions, and the numbers just get worse.
I want to give you another local example of some questions you need to ask there in Santa Clara County. So after the election, obviously, there was a lot of scrutiny on electronic voting systems, and it is a rather opaque area, but they now have market share. And one of the leading companies that has market share is the Dominion Voting Systems. And so we took a look at all the checkbooks that we have at the state level and local level around the country, and we tied out contracts and payments from local jurisdictions into Dominion. For instance, in Georgia, I think they had a 10-year, $110 million contract, but the payments in those Dominion contracts are front-loaded. So Dominion will collect about 85 million of the 110 million on their contracts in the first 2 years of the contract. So if you don't like the way the voting went in Georgia this year, it's the second year of the contract, like you've already paid them out basically on their contract. And then underneath that, you have the product list, and everything's in this contract. I mean, right down to the paper you put into the voting machines, and then the ballots go into their proprietary ballot boxes, and it's all, what looks to me very expensive. At its nexus, Dominion is basically a software technology company. And I'm talking to all the execs in Silicon Valley, and you know Moore's law. Technology is obsolete in the current period every 2 to 3 years. So why are you signing a 10-year contract in the state of Georgia for $110 million, front loading all the payments? It's absurd. Well, in Santa Clara County, we noticed they signed an 8-year contract for over $16 million with Dominion. So I think somebody on this call, a member of the organization, needs to start asking questions, demanding answers, and get to the bottom of what's in that contract. And furthermore, the city of San Francisco signed a contract with Dominion, but they didn't sign for 8 years. They signed for 5 years.
Adam, it really takes your breath away what's going on right now. It just takes our breath away. People on this call want to know what they can do. They want to get behind your efforts. They're impressed with you. You mentioned something about a petition.
So I think, step one, come to openthebooks.com. Across the masthead of the website is a petition tab. If you click on that, the read the bill petition, but also sign the second petition, because that is a petition on supporting our effort to open the California state checkbook to sunshine. So you'll probably want to sign both of those. We are going to put a marketing budget behind the read the bill petition. We haven't done that yet. Just organically, we've already gotten about 15,000 people to sign that petition. So it's off to a good start.
This is Adam's website, of course. And then do we have Adam's last question for us as well?
When you say the last question, Jane.
But Adam had one more.
The results from that poll.
Yeah.
Yes.
Outstanding.
The two front runners were public corruption and lack of civil order.
One of the things that I'm a little surprised about, I thought the government's response to the coronavirus would rank higher, considering all the pain that the state of California and localities have inflicted on the citizens. So it's kind of interesting that it did not rank high, but very pleased, almost a 70% response on corruption, the level of corruption, government spending, and regulation. Here's something that I'll kind of break on the call today that we're going to come out with shortly in my column at Forbes, where I'm a senior contributor. So to their credit, the Trump administration rolled back about half of the pages in the Federal Register on federal regulations. For sure, our auditors felt that we would see a corresponding decrease in the number of attorneys employed in the federal agencies. We've been on this issue since 2014. In 2014, there was about 26,000 lawyers employed in the federal agencies. By 2017, that number had risen to about 34,000 lawyers in 200 federal agencies employed. I just got the data in from 2019, and we cut the data, and the top line on this is the number of federal lawyers grew during the Trump years, and it's now up nearly to 37,000 lawyers in the federal agencies. So this is particularly troubling. Now, if they were all at the Department of Justice going after bad guys or people that stole PPP money or unemployment benefits, maybe we could all get behind that effort. But only 1 out of every 3 are at the Department of Justice. That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem. And most of what you said tonight is a problem, Adam. It's amazing. Well, what you have shared with us is tremendous. It's your dedication and effort on behalf of the American people is just tremendous. We thank you so much. What you shared with us is absolutely awful, but what you are doing is absolutely terrific. And we're just thrilled that you're with us tonight.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. This has been a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for extending the invitation to have us share. It's terrific. We spend all this time with big data. It's time, it's great to interact with regular people. That's for sure. I really appreciate it.
Well, we want you to come out to Silicon Valley and be with us in person and know our audience, because we are the kind of people that you will enjoy, because we think you make a lot of sense, Adam.
Well, those events always steel my spine for the difficult road ahead. I want to leave you with one final thought. you know, I'm Polish, and when I grew up, you know, we were sending care packages back to family in Poland. And this was, you know, I was born in '69. So I was at a formative age when Solidarity was formed. The co-founders, Lech Walesa and Mieczysław Gill. So I eventually ran for governor in Illinois in 2009. And on the Friday before the Tuesday election, both of those guys flew in and endorsed my campaign in Chicago. And they told the story how nobody gave them a chance versus communism. Walesa said they met with kings and potentates and prime ministers, and he said nobody gave them a chance to succeed. And he said on paper, they didn't stand a chance. They didn't have tanks and bullets and airplanes and guns or anything else. They only had one thing: the belief that they could win. And you and I, we have the principles and values to win. And at the end of the day, I believe that our principles and values will carry the day.